Football's elite are at it again. Let's talk about it. Quick history overview. In 2019, president of the European Clubs Association and Juventus, Andrea Agnelli, also known as the lobbyist for football's elite, proposed a closed Super League-style system for the Champions League. It would include promotion and relegation amongst the 3 UEFA competitions, and needless to say, everyone universally hated it, and the idea was scrapped.
Know your fucking place, trash!
Then there were the talks of a European Super League a year later, where the elites of Europe would play in their own closed 20-team league. How did they justify this? Well, that'd be using a pandemic to excuse their terrible debts, of course. Thankfully though, FIFA, the lesser of the two evils, did not allow that. Then this year, for post-2024, a new proposal appeared, an expansion from 32 to 36 teams in a Swiss model approach. Basically how it goes is, with 36 teams, each team will play 10 matches, 5 home and 5 away. At the end of the 10 matches, teams will be seeded from 1 to 32. The first 8 advance into the 16-team knockout stage, while the following 16 go into a playoff round to determine the final 8 of the knockout stage. The idea is to have more matchups between bigger teams in the tournament early on. That way there's an increase in TV revenue. The current model for TV revenue is based off of market pools. Depending on the size of the market, the club will earn the appropriate amount of the revenue. Just to put into perspective of how bad the money distribution already is, this year after match day 6, Real Madrid earned over 19 million from the market pool, while RB Leipzig earned just under 8 million. And if you think that's bad, look at a team like Shakhtar, who only earned 500k from the market pool. So with this extra revenue, thanks to more larger matchups, we could be seeing the money going all around in order to improve the overall competition. Well, you see, we're talking about the greedy elite here. You see, when the European Super League was admonished by FIFA, the elite were furious. They had their grand plan of screwing over European football even more thrown right back in their faces. It was a rare sight of justice for the world of modern football. But just like the spoiled little shits that they are, the elite threw a fit in the form of f***ing over the Champions League money distribution in retaliation. It's an unfortunate sight to see, but the elite have significant power in the world of football. So they know they can just create smaller versions of their so-called European Super League by pushing for even bigger shares of the market pool than before. As a result, the new proposal will far worsen the parity in European football and make the rich even richer. This could do irreparable damage to the footballing world. Earlier this year, Florentino Perez said, "Everyone realizes that the current competitive environment must be reformed as soon as possible. The competitiveness and quality of our competitions must improve," which, might I mention, this is the same motherfucker who has been pushing for a Super League since the beginning of the millennium. Now, although this quote is in regards to the Super League, it can still be connected back to the new Champions League proposal as well, because the way the owners of these massive clubs are able to force UEFA to concede more and more to their terms is in part due to the impacts of the pandemic. Even before the pandemic, there's been talks about how flawed some clubs' business models are, and even just the overall football economy. An inflation of players' salaries over the years has constantly created a larger strain on clubs, so even consequences of not qualifying for European competitions can see significant impacts to finances. So when the pandemic hit, it truly exposed the football economy. I mean, hell, you saw players and staff taking massive pay cuts, and these weren't just from small clubs. These were from clubs like Real Madrid and Arsenal. Clubs had less purchasing power than before, with player values dropping over nearly 10%, meaning clubs might have had to sell their best players with discounts to maintain financial stability. Going back to Perez's quote about how the competitiveness and quality of our competitions must improve seems quite ironic, as many clubs are suffering more than Real, and all Florentino and the rest of the elite have been doing is negotiating for even bigger shares, creating an even larger gap in financial equality. It's simple. He masks greed with concern. These higher ups aren't concerned about competitiveness. All they care about is how many people are watching the match and how much revenue is it generating. If they did care, there would be more discussion about how to create a more fair share between all clubs that qualify for the Champions League, while still maintaining a certain level of superiority amongst the top clubs. But all they care about is themselves and how they can dig themselves out of their debts and mismanagements, leaving all the other clubs to die in the cold. The elite have the most power due in large part to decades of constant systemic financial inequality, and unfortunately they will get their way because in some perspectives it's just too late to go back and fix things. If you you recall, the tournament has expanded from 32 teams to 36 teams, and with that, there's 4 new slots, of course. One goes to Liga, making sure that all the top 5 leagues have 4 guaranteed spots into the Champions League. But the other 3 spots are approached a bit differently. They're rewarded as wildcard spots for top clubs with previously successful histories in the past years of the competition. So for example, let's say that the new proposal was actually implemented for next season. That would mean Liverpool, who might not actually qualify for the Champions League, could use a wildcard-like safety net to actually get themselves into the Champions League, even though they finished 7th or 8th or wherever they're going to finish this year. This in turn could either screw over a domestic competitor who worked their way up to the top 4 to qualify, or worse, it could screw over another domestic champion in another country. This gimmick just excuses underperforming teams and allows them to bounce back while screwing over a club that worked hard to get where they were. It's just another way to bail out the rich while fucking over the competitors. Not to mention, it removes some of the excitement from domestic leagues with the knowledge that a top club could just bail themselves out anyways. ECA and Juve president Andrea Agnelli had his say about the safety net situation. I have great respect for everything that Atalanta are doing, but without international history and thanks to just one great season, they had direct access to the primary European club competition. Is that right or not? Yes? I have absolutely no clue what you were trying to achieve with this point. On the other hand, the European leagues think otherwise. They believe that the 3 slots should actually be reserved for domestic champions instead, and I do agree with that, very much so. But I'm not an elitist, so I don't know anything, obviously. This concept has a lot more benefits though, and I'll tell you why. Thanks to the UEFA country coefficients, also known as another great way to further widen the gap between the haves and have-nots, Ajax had their 2019 Cinderella story progressing all the way to the semifinals only to play Apoel in the playoff for the next tournament just weeks later. This was due to their league not having a single automatic qualification slot, as the Netherlands coefficient at the time was 12th. Although now Ajax are able to just automatically qualify for the Champions League thanks to their country coefficient now being 7th, this is still a problem that can be prevented with this new solution. But unfortunately, I don't think the extra spots will be rewarded to domestic champions. Why? Because UEFA will probably concede more and more to top clubs because now more than ever, the football economy is extremely vulnerable. As a result, those at the top of the mountains have an even larger influence as they are the ones who do dominate the market currently. With the new incorporation of the Swiss model, this means the total number of matches goes from 125 to 225. This adds 4 extra midweek matches, which makes things even more difficult between the European competitions and the domestic competitions. One notable competition that comes to people's minds is the EFL Cup. With the original proposal, the EFL Cup risks being removed completely to relax the strain of schedules. But in doing so, the EFL could lose up to 1/3 of its revenue as it depends on the participation of top clubs in the cup. But you think the higher-ups care one bit? Well, you already know the answer. More European matches are important in the development of football. We absolutely feel there is room to play more European games. That's bang in the center of where we are coming from. There's a perfect counter-argument to this from the executive director of the Football Supporters Europe group, Ronan Ivane. More games than the UEFA Champions League won't solve any of the big problems that afflict European football. In fact, they have the potential to make them worse. Supporters don't want more football, they want better football. And that means a more level playing field on both the domestic and continental stage. There's also a fantastic analogy that Oliver Kay from The Athletic made. It goes like this. Steak is a nice occasional meal that you enjoy from time to time. It's not supposed to be an everyday meal. Just like how everyone loves a great matchup between 2 European greats, it's not supposed to be a common occurrence because that's what builds up more interest and hype for the matchup. Oh, but it doesn't end there. Football is still growing in some countries, but in others, it is falling into irrelevance. If we are not progressive, we are simply protecting a system that is no longer there. A system that is made up of domestic games that will have little interest for our kids. Said, of course, Andrea Agnelli. By now, I think you've realized that this man is a piece of shit. First off, how tone deaf do you actually have to be to say something like this? It is because of the elitists who act for themselves that this is the case. They're always pushing for more shares of the revenue, with absolutely no regard for clubs below, further widening the gap between the rich and the rest. But no, it's the boring domestic leagues that have caused this, and totally not the greedy owners at the top who constantly aim to ruin the game for their own monetary liking. No. This is probably my favorite quote though. The New York Times articles about football football are some of the worst you'll ever read. It's constantly bad take after bad take, and this one ain't no exception. Agnelli is not advocating anything that would damage his club's, or his collaborators' interests. But it does not follow that those who stand in his way are acting out of some sort of higher purpose. This week, several clubs, most notably Crystal Palace and Aston Villa, led the resistance to the reform of the Champions League, insisting that it would irrevocably damage domestic competitions. Where do I begin with this one? Well, according to Rory Smith, you as a club who relies on domestic competitions for economic stability does not justify you fighting for that when it's being risked by a competition reform proposed by higher-ups who have absolutely no regard for your mere presence. When I first read this specific paragraph, I genuinely thought it was Andrea Agnelli himself saying this. I mean, how? How can you have this bad of a take? Straying away from the worst takes known to mankind, we should probably remind ourselves that footballers are human, and humans have their physical limits. Already there's a concern about injuries for players. Some are more prone than others, but at the end of the day, no one is entirely immune to the injury bug, whether it's contact or non-contact. A study done by Dr. Chris Carling of the University of Lancashire investigated the effects match congestion had on elite footballers. There were two subject groups. One group who had played 3 successive matches just less than 3 days apart, and one group who played 3 matches more than 3 days apart. It showed very obviously that the group who played the more congested schedule saw significantly higher injury rates than those in the opposite group who had a more relaxed schedule. The expansion of the Champions League, along with all other club competitions and even international matches as well, can risk players even more than now, where it's already a constant growing problem. The rich don't care though. The players are just mere puppets to them. And that's terrifying, knowing not only are club competitions being disregarded, so are players' well-beings. What really comes to mind are exciting players like Christian Pulisic, who already have awful injury issues. Pulisic plays in an explosive manner, and that risks his hamstrings significantly more. This proposal puts players at risk of seeing prolonged absences, and having more match congestion leads to especially higher risk for players like Christian. Andrea Agnelli recently described the new proposed Swiss model system as beautiful. It is anything but. The new Champions League proposal, like I said before, is just greed being disguised as concern. The inevitable is unfortunately going to happen, and so will the regression across the European footballing landscapes. Andrea Agnelli, the president behind all this, only wants to benefit his own club and those who share the same aspirations as him. He's more of a lobbyist for the elite than a president. I'll round this off with a final quote from Bundesliga chief executive Christian Seifert. The brutal truth is that a few of these so-called super clubs are in fact poorly managed cash-burning machines that were not able in a decade of incredible growth to come close to a somehow sustainable business model. If they succeed in driving revenues up further, they will burn this money like that they burned in the last few years. But what do you think about all this? Leave your comments down below. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. I had a ton of fun making it. If we could get, I don't know, 200 likes on this video, that would be fantastic. Be sure to follow my Twitter, my Twitch, my Instagram, and my TikTok. And until next time, I'll see you guys.